Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here. This is my second time presenting. I was here in 2019, and I just feel very humbled in all these prestigious speakers, and here am I. So I'm very honored to be part of it. The gospel at war with the city of Boston. The city of Boston has a flag, and on the flag is a Bible verse. May God favor us as he favored our forefathers. It's in Latin, so most people can't read it, but it was put there in the 1920s, and it's still there. And our job was to remind the city of that flag. But anyway, I want to talk a little bit about our organization. We're a New Hampshire-based charitable trust. We were founded in 2009. We run a week-long family camp, and we shoot cannons. And we proved to Biden that you can own a cannon, by the way, under the Second Amendment. We host the Samuel Blumenfeld Archives. How many people have heard of Sam Blumenfeld? Because every single hand should go up. Sam was a close friend of Reverend Rushdoony. He wrote for the Chalcedon Report, and they actually have some of his books in print. Sam was the pioneer in the modern homeschool movement, and I inherited his library, and we digitized a lot of his stuff. It's all available free, and information about that on the table there. And just recently, a Christian school in Zimbabwe reached out to us. They wanted some Sam Blumenfeld alphaphonics. We donated about 150 copies, and there's a picture of these beautiful children, and it's a very poor school. And the founder of the school reached out to me recently. He said, we're going to build a new school, and we're going to name it after Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld. And he wants us to be there for the grand opening. And I hope some of you folks can show up too for that. We have a publishing arm. We put some things back in print, some things that really needed to be put in print that we've done. And I missed, can you go back? I missed, can you go back to, okay. A model of Christian charity. City of Boston. This is a speech that, I should say a sermon that John Winthrop gave before he landed in Boston on his ship, the Arbella. To this. This is what we have now in Boston. So they've departed a little bit since its colonial days. And back in 17, I was invited at a prayer meeting in the mayor's office. The mayor was nowhere to be found. He had nothing to do with it. And it was an inner city pastor that invited me. And there was a nice group of believers, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, and we prayed for the city's leaders. And you know, they say you have to pray for your enemies. So when you pray for the city's leaders, you're also praying for your enemies. It's two in one. It doesn't say you have to like your leaders, but you have to pray for them. We prayed for racial harmony, and as I was leaving there, I thought, we need to step up to the plate. I think God laid it upon my heart. So I thought, let's fly the Christian flag on City Hall Plaza to commemorate Constitution Day, which is actually tomorrow, September 17th, but also, more importantly, Boston's rich Christian history. And we were going to have a speaker to speak on that subject. We were going to have a man from the South Sudan, a pastor, to talk about the blessings of liberty as opposed to what he was living in the Sudan. And we were going to have our chaplain talk about the need for racial harmony and racial reconciliation. And several years prior, we flew the Gadsden flag without any problem whatsoever. We had a great time. We had our friend, the Patriot pastor. He was 6'7", dressed up in colonial attire with a musket, walked through downtown Boston. It was a fun day. No problem with that flag, but I asked to fly the Christian flag, and it took, the lady I dealt with was the same one I dealt with the Christian flag. She was the daughter-in-law of the mayor, Menino, who's since passed. And she just said, just tell us what you want to do, and the permit shouldn't be a problem. But a month went by, and I kept on calling, and finally I got a no. They said, you've been denied, and I said, I need an official response, either an email or a letter. So I got a letter from the man who became the defendant in the case saying that it was a violation of the First Amendment. He said, you can consider flying a secular flag, or you can bring Christian flags, but you can't fly them on the flagpole. Well, the city of Boston had a program where civic organizations and even private individuals could fly a flag and have a ceremony. And there have been about 280 plus instances where other flags were flown, about 50 or 60 different flags, including the flag of Communist China. But what made it worse than just flying that horrible flag is that the city passed a resolution honoring the Communist Revolution of China, and they had elected officials presenting at that flag raising, which got me a little upset. So when I got the email, I knew we had a case. I said, this is a case here. The separation of church and state is not in the First Amendment, nowhere near it, not even mentioned in the Constitution. I sent out a news release to a bunch of local newspapers and radio stations and TV stations. Nobody bit. And then I sent an email out to some friends, and one lady suggested I get a hold of Liberty Counsel. And they had a table here back in 19. And that night, I just emailed them, and I got a call the next day. We want your case. I said, great, let's do it. So they started off with a demand letter, and I got an interview by the local newspaper and a few other media outlets. And I thought it would, can you go back to that first slide? I didn't even push it in advance. Yeah. And it ended up with a front page story of the Boston Herald, no-fly zone. Kim, the dictator of North Korea, got the top billing, but I got second billing. Here in Boston, here's a slide of the Chinese Communist flag raising. So you can see where the city's getting a little twisted, where it's okay to fly this flag, and the rainbow flag, and the transgender flag, and all these other crazy flags, but our Christian flag is not accepted. Now, the flag on the left is the city's flag with the Latin verse from 1 Kings, may God favor us as he favored our forefathers. It's also on the city seal. The flag in the middle, they fly this flag in City Hall Plaza, Bunker Hill Day. That's called the Bunker Hill flag. And it's a lot like the Christian flag, isn't it? Except the colors are a little taken. And there's a pine tree on the cross. And I don't have the time to go into, some of you probably know the concept of the pine tree, but it's basically, it was a polite, obscene gesture to the king when they put that pine tree on there. And then the Christian flag, which is non-denominational. It was created by two guys in Coney Island back in the late 1890s. And I say two good things come out of Coney Island. The Nathan's Famous hot dogs and maybe that's, the Christian flag. So I'm teased. I think there's a lot of good things in Coney Island. So there was it was other flag raisings around the country that had been going on. I didn't even know about it. One was in, of all places, Newark, New Jersey, since 2017 on Easter for the whole week. And city officials participate in that. And I spoke to the pastor who runs it. He says, yeah, they came and we prayed for them. It was a great thing. He said, we got a little pushback initially, but after that it wasn't a problem. And in New Haven, Connecticut, did the same thing there. So we lost our first round. We lost three different rounds. And it went to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. We lost 3-0. We had a Reagan appointee and two Obama appointee judges. I think that was the case. And we didn't think we did too much justice when we had Obama appointed justices. Then it was in June of 21 is when it went to the Supreme Court. And it was, talk about an interesting development. Jonathan Alexander, the man I met here that represented Liberty Counsel, who used to live 2 doors down from us when he was a little boy, I didn't even know him. I didn't know what happened. He's the one that hand-delivered the case to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court only takes about 1% of the cases every year. They get about 800 a year. They take 1%. Don't tell me God's hand wasn't in this at all. September 30th, the Supreme Court decided to take the case. You need 3 justices to sign off on that. And there's all kinds of media. We got a call from one of my attorneys. He said, city wants to settle. They'll let you fly the flag, and they will pay the legal fees. I says, well, you're doing this pro bono. I said, I'm not out any legal fees. He said, don't worry about it. The state of California made a very generous donation to us to over $2 million because they won a case there. I think it was John MacArthur's church that they defended. And I said, look, I don't gamble, but we got to roll the dice. I said, I don't want to settle. It's a lot bigger than just having a ceremony. Liberty Counsel took this case, and they had 3 criteria. Number 1, is it winnable? Number 2, will it set a precedent? And number 3 is the organization or individual responsible. Well, 2 out of 3 isn't bad, I guess. But so that was really, I said, no, and if we did decide to settle, the lower cases would have stood. We would have lost. It wouldn't have been at all. It wouldn't have been glorifying God or anything. It would have been terrible. So we had our oral argument in January of 22, and we weren't allowed to go into the Supreme Court. We had to stay, we actually across the street, Liberty Counsel has a piece of property there, and just the attorney, Matt Staver, and his wife. And we had 19 amicus briefs on our behalf, one of which came from the ACLU. Let me say that again. The ACLU, no friend of Christendom, had an amicus brief on our behalf. And the U.S. Department of Justice, really injustice, for some reason. And our camp chaplain said he said God's hand was in this, and even they couldn't deny this. We had 12 attorney generals sign an amicus brief on our behalf. We had Notre Dame Law School and numerous other groups. Mike Pence's group did an amicus brief for us. John Eidsmoe's group did an amicus brief for us. We had about 9 against us, including Freedom from Religion, which is what you'd expect, and some other groups. And we had, I think, 5 or 6 attorney generals, including the ones from Massachusetts, Connecticut, etc., all against us. And it made a lot of media coverage, pretty much all over the world. It was really amazing. I never expected. This was never my intention at all. And here I was on Fox News, Fox and Friends, and Newsmax. In fact, I was ready to go on Newsmax when the Roe v. Wade decision was leaked. And I thought, oh, gee, they're gonna cut me again. But I was able to get in there. And not only was I able to talk about the Roe v. Wade, but I was talk about that movie called Roe v. Wade, which I recommend. And one of the characters depicted in the movie was a dear friend of mine, Dr. Mildred Jefferson. She was the first black woman to graduate from Harvard Medical School. And she was played by Stacey Dash, who's become a friend of ours too. So God has an interesting way of introducing people. We had a lot of positive coverage, even from unlikely sources like the New York Times. But we had our share of negative coverage, and I've got my share of death threats. And can you imagine people upset about something like this? I was getting death threats and lots of nasty comments. But I think the old expression is when you're flying over the target, you get the flak. You have to expect that when you're advancing the cause, when you're standing up for what's right, standing up for religious freedom, what have you. This group here, the man behind Shurtleff v. Boston, this was a left-wing group, so-called Christian group. Word and Way, anyone familiar with that group? Word and Way. They're based in Missouri. And that was the worst piece they did. Although it just told them what I believed. It showed me at some end that it was anti-vax, and we didn't take the January 6th narrative literally and so forth. So I said, I kind of like it. I have no trouble with that. And evidence of God's hand in this case. I mentioned ACLU. ACLU and the U.S. Department of Justice were among the 19. I already mentioned that. And all the good people that backed us. And those against us, Freedom from Religion, Jewish Alliance for Law, National Council of Churches, which we expect, National Council of Churches. And I don't have the time to go through the whole timeline, but it took almost 5 years from the injunction or the first demand letter until the city of Boston paid $2.1 million in legal fees to Liberty Counsel. And we had, when we had oral argument, we went down for a prayer vigil, and then we had a rally the next morning, and these are some of the folks that came out. It was a great time. It was just a great body of believers that came out, and the oral argument was very interesting. I don't have the time to go over that. You can go to lc.org/flag and get all of the information. If you're legal scholars, you'll really enjoy some of this. But their attorney, actually, the city's attorney actually did us a favor because he said he's doing more to help our case than our attorneys are. And so I won't have time to read this, but this is interesting aside. There were no cameras allowed in the courtroom, but you see one of the justices, the seat's missing. That's Sotomayor. She wouldn't be in the room because Gorsuch wouldn't wear a mask. So it's maskless. So that was really interesting. Well, these are some of the fine points of the oral argument. The city's goal is to foster diversity of communities and commemorate events or occasions. Clarence Thomas said, if Christians are not part of that diversity the city is supposed to support, that's limited diversity. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, isn't celebrating Constitution Day considered an event? And Kavanaugh said, it seems the Establishment Clause is not an issue with this case since there has not been equal treatment of religious groups or religious speech. And Gorsuch said, the city cast religion into the same category as speech deemed offensive by censoring the religious viewpoint. And I like what Gorsuch said. He said, so-called separation of church and state. That didn't get some people on the left pretty angry. We had a press conference afterwards, and usually the Supreme Court decides within 3 or 4 days, but they don't always let you know the decision. The decision came out May 2nd, and this was the front page of the Boston Herald, Supreme spanking, 9-0, you know. And Matt Staver, the attorney, the founder of Liberty Counsel, he said, do you have a copy of that? I said, sure, what are you going to do with it? I want to frame it. I said, that's a good idea. It's like if you're a pitcher, you pitch a perfect game. This is like for a lawyer, this is like their perfect game. So we actually had our flag raising, and it was a beautiful, we prayed, we got there the day before, we prayed around the flagpole, we witnessed, and not witnessed, but we also ministered to some homeless people. It was a beautiful experience. And then we had 2 of our campers, one played a trumpet and one played a violin to Amazing Grace as the flag went up. And Jonathan Alexander emceed the program, and if you know Jonathan, he's got an incredible voice. He sang it, and then we ended it with God Bless America. We had a Christian artist, Ben Lane. We had a couple hundred people there, and it was just a beautiful event, and it made, of course, lots of media. And I said it was a very expensive case for Boston. There's the copy of the check. But more important than that ceremony, the lemon test. And the Lemon versus Kurtzman, this is what got a lot of governments to say you can't wear a cross, you can't say God bless you, you can't even bring a candy cane because that has some kind of Christian allegory to it. And it was just, so the Lemon test, this case, our case, and Joe Kennedy, Coach Kennedy's case, basically put the Lemon test to rest. So it's okay to bring your 10 Commandments on the public arena. It's okay to fly a Christian flag. It's okay to have a sermon. It's okay to do street preaching, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're noticing is that towns and cities across the United States are either doing 2 things. They're either allowing people to raise Christian flags or pro-life flags. Like just 2 days ago in Billerica, Massachusetts, they said, okay, you can fly your flag, your pro-life flag for 2 weeks. And that was because of we like to think it was part to our case. And every day, it seems like every week, I'm getting calls from around the country. I even had a call from a student in Kansas City interviewing me. He said, our class is taking your case. Said, I have to play I'm on the city side, although I disagree with the city. I have to, take the city side. And just, what was it, just a few days ago, Montgomery, Alabama. They're trying to get a month declared Christian History Month, and I was in touch with some of the folks there. So the moral of the story is, yes, you can fight City Hall, and you can win, especially if you've got God, if it's, God's involved in this, and I believe that he was. And this is a picture of our flag on top of City Hall, on City Hall Plaza. So time's up. Thank you for listening. God bless.